The Philippines' controversial president, Ferdinand Marcos, addressed the UN General Assembly today and called for an end to the arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union. Tonight on Nightline, a live interview of others as an authoritarian ruler who's been in office too long. But there is no controversy about the importance of the Philippines to U.S. interests in Southeast Asia. We'll talk with President Marcos live tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Good evening. It may be just a handful of people taking turns, but our phones at ABC News, both in New York and here in Washington, have been active all evening. There are people out there who don't like President Marcos and who object to the fact that he will be our guest here this evening. Indeed, back in Manila, a joint statement was issued today by a group of political opposition parties. That statement said, in part, unable to deceive their people any longer, the Marcoses themselves will spend the 10th anniversary of their dictatorship in the land of their sponsors to report on a job well done for the imperialist masters. And Amnesty International has issued another report just yesterday complaining about numerous human rights violations, including torture, illegal detention, arbitrary killings by government forces in the Philippines, and noting that it has yet to receive a reply to any of its specific questions or concerns delivered in writing to the Ministry of National Defense in Manila. Indeed, as our own correspondent, Mark Litke, reports, it may be difficult for a man to hold power for a full generation without making enemies.
Itong mga taong ito na nagmamalaki ngayon, nakasangkapan ng mga dayuhan.
After 17 years of autocratic rule, President Ferdinand Marcos is still very much in charge of the Philippines, acting tough and decisive as ever, especially when berating his critics. With strong backing from his armed forces over the years, with friends and relatives appointed to key government positions, Marcos effectively controls the courts, the legislature, and the news media here. Frequent political arrests have scattered and weakened his opposition. A generation of Filipinos has known only Marcos. So when he finally ended 8 years of martial law and restored free elections last year, there was no doubt as to who would win. And even now, de facto military rule is still a fact of life, since Marcos can still rule by decree. But Ferdinand Marcos is no common military strongman. To many, he is Apo, the powerful uncle who heads a traditional Philippine family. And he carefully uses those qualities that many Filipinos admire most. The skilled politician and folksy man of the people. The Army veteran, war hero, and lover of history. The devout Catholic in a land that is 80% Catholic, married to a former beauty queen, Imelda, who now rivals her husband in power, prestige, and ambition. Even his harshest critics believe Marcos will be around for some years to come. They've learned not to underestimate his longevity.
Mr. Marcos is a man who's obsessed with power. And all the moves he takes are always premised on whether or not they will affect his power and his staying in office. He's a very shrewd politician, very adroit, very agile, very ruthless.
While the opposition here has been unable to mount any serious challenge to President Marcos, they have drawn international attention to the repressiveness of his regime, infuriating the image-conscious president. Jose Diokno, in fact, stirred up a real hornet's nest recently when he hosted this British television program, documenting the failures and abuses of the Marcos government.
Yet most of my people are poor and suffer hardship and oppression.
While this documentary has been banned in the Philippines, a pirated version has been circulating underground in Manila. And it has prompted one of the most emotional outbursts from President Marcos in years. In a nationally televised speech, the president blasted his opponents as tools of foreign powers. And then, in the same speech, he suddenly claimed that a nationwide terrorist plot had just been uncovered, implying that old political foes were involved.
We have just received intelligence reports to the effect that there is a plan for a nationwide strike which shall be accompanied by assassination and bombings. Perhaps it's on September 1st, perhaps it's on September 11th, perhaps it's during my trip in the United States.
What followed in the next few weeks was a stark reminder of the power that Marcos wields even without martial law. Dozens of labor union members were arrested by presidential order, and then in a makeshift courtroom in the gymnasium of a military camp, they were charged with sedition and conspiracy. Simultaneously, to crack down on what he called an increase in street crime, Marcos ordered the formation of a special plainclothes police unit. With orders to shoot criminals on sight, these secret marshals killed nearly 50 suspects in only 2 weeks, before Marcos declared that law and order had been restored. Critics charged that both crackdowns were related to the president's U.S. visit, orchestrated by the government as a warning that anti-Marcos incidents will not be tolerated while he's out of the country. But if Marcos seemed to be overreacting, it may be because the Philippines does face mounting problems that could eventually lead to widespread unrest. After impressive economic growth in the 70s, which did benefit many here, the Philippine economy is faltering. The low wages that multinational companies find so attractive here are now making it difficult for workers to keep up with inflation. In agriculture, key exports like coconuts are plummeting. Coconuts support 1/4 of the Philippine population, and with worldwide recession reducing demand and prices, these workers say it's hardly worth going to market. Indeed, many farmers have joined the ranks of the chronic poor. Nearly half the population is now living in abject poverty, with disease and malnutrition widespread. And in the Marcos years, the gap between rich and poor has grown much wider, a classic formula for open revolt. To date, rebellion in the Philippines has been limited in success, but persistent and deadly. These Muslim rebels have battled the government for more than 10 years now, and roughly 60,000 soldiers, rebels, and civilians have died. Elsewhere, government troops are spending more time and money battling the new People's Army of the outlawed Communist Party. Here, Philippine soldiers are taught how to flush NPA guerrillas out of the jungle areas they control. But the worsening economy and reports of government atrocities in these remote regions continue to swell the ranks of communist supporters. Watching political developments in the Philippines with concern, as it has for years, is the United States. The Philippines is America's military springboard for Asia, the Pacific, and now even the Middle East, so political stability here is considered vital to U.S. security interests. Under a military agreement signed in 1979, the United States is paying $500 million rent over 5 years for continued use of Clark Air Base and the massive naval facility at Subic Bay. While critics say the U.S. military presence here only props up the Marcos government, American officials insist these bases are important counterweights to the growing Soviet influence in the region, and therefore important to Philippine security as well. In fact, after years of strained relations under the Carter administration, critical of the Marcos human rights record, Reagan administration officials are now trying to strengthen U.S.-Philippine ties.
We're dealing with a friendly government, an allied government, a government that's in firm control, and we're working on fortifying our relationship with that government.
With a friend in the White House again, President Marcos is clearly pressing his advantage. He hinted recently that if the U.S. wants continued use of the bases, more rent would have to be paid, more aid given to the Philippine economy.
We pride ourselves in believing that we have become mature, and we can look anyone in the face and say that we know exactly what we owe you, but we know exactly what you owe us.
President Marcos is said to be motivated by a deep sense of history, and he doesn't want to leave the Philippines in a state of chaos, lowering history's opinion of him. But if the gap between rich and poor continues to grow wider, if moderate opponents continue to be radicalized by repression, if the military takes over the government following Marcos because there's no viable alternative, then history's judgment of Ferdinand Marcos may not be so kind. This is Mark Litke for Nightline in Manila.
With us now, live in our New York studios, President Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines. Mr. President, welcome, and let me give you this opportunity, without asking you any specific questions, simply to respond to what we've both just seen.
All I can say is that's a little amusing, a little sloppy, distorted, and exaggerated. For instance, all of these supposed complaints about my opposition back home, they talk about support from the people. Why? The elections, they say, happened only last year. There have been elections since 1978. The members of the National Assembly were elected in 1978. The governors and the mayors were elected in 1980. The president was elected in 1981. And the chairman and council members of the 54,000 villages were elected only this year. You can see that the information is deficient. With respect to the people who are considered below the poverty line, our line is 2,999 pesos. And in 1975, about 59% were below that line. In 1972, but in 75, this went down to 31%. In 1980, it went down to 20%. So there has been an increase in the number of those within the middle class. Savings have, and time deposits increased from 5 billion to 42 billion. The income of the farmer has increased from 800 to 2,800 per hectare. The holdings are 3 hectares for irrigated lands and 5 hectares for non-irrigated lands. So how can they talk about lack of income and all that? The truth of the matter is that the opposition, the political opposition, that is, cannot get together because they haven't got any basis to oppose the present administration. And with respect to this supposed rebellion, the Philippines is the only country which has succeeded in capturing the first, second, and third echelon leaders of the communist rebellion in any country in Asia, or for that matter, perhaps all over the world, and where 20,000 communist rebels with arms surrendered en masse, and 37,000 rebels known as secessionists have surrendered. So how can they talk about instability in a country which only this year, in an election, supported the present government, and at the same time in referenda, plebiscites, as well as all kinds of general references to the people? The people have voted to support the government. Incidentally, I do not decide questions alone. And under the Constitution, I may issue a decree only if there is an emergency, and only if the Batasan Pambansa or the National Assembly authorizes it. As we work it out, the president can issue a decree only if he calls a caucus of the party in power, and the party in power authorizes it. So there is a consensus.
All right, Mr. President, with your consensus now, I hope we can take a small break,
okay.
And then we'll come back
Sorry,
and continue our
too long.
conversation. Thank you, sir. We'll continue in a moment.
This is not a chauffeur-driven limousine. And we don't own the biggest house on the street. But we do have money. M-O-N-Y. Financial specialists who gave us the things we need, like a tax shelter. And life insurance that has a tax advantage. Because these days, help with managing your money isn't a luxury. It's a necessity.
You don't have to be rich to have money.
Something's coming. Something as mysterious as midnight, cool as ice. It's new licorice ice, mint with a surprising hint of licorice, only from Velements.
Great taste that only happens here. Velements. Great taste that's always cool and clear.
Cool refreshment. That's the Velements taste.
Great taste that only happens here. Velements.
Try new licorice ice.
Like gold itself, there's a car with a tradition of being an investment. The Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme for 1983. If you'd bought a new 1979 Cutlass Supreme Coupe, chances are you could sell it today and get back about 90% of what you paid for it. Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. Historically a golden investment.
Oldsmobile.
Have one built for you.
Airborne presents the nightmare of shipping with the wrong Air Express company.
Hello? My package is 3 hours late.
One Air Express company is proud of its 95% before noon on-time delivery record, while Airborne says bunk. Anything under 100% isn't good enough. When thousands of packages aren't delivered on time, thousands of people are in big trouble. At Airborne, we're shooting for a 100% on-time record. And whatever it takes, we're going to make it. Airborne overnight. We're shooting for 100%.
Continuing our conversation now with Ferdinand Marcos, President of the Philippines. Mr. President, you said in that report that we just heard, we know what we owe you, and we also know what you owe us. What did you mean by that?
Well, actually, in the past, we always looked up to our colonizers like the Spaniards and the Americans as supermen, you know, and we always depended on you. There was lack of maturity. Now, I think the Filipino has become mature, and he can thank the Spaniards for a political organization, Christianity, the Americans for belief in democracy, and also the establishment of a national educational system. But at the same time, we must ask if we are going to risk our lives again in supporting the United States in case there is a war under the Mutual Defense Pact, then we must know exactly what will happen to us, because after the Second World War, we were in trouble. We lost 1 million men in the people in the Second World War. 75% of our cities were devastated, and we had a difficult time about it.
Do you feel you were badly treated by the United States, or inadequately treated, perhaps?
In a way, yes. In a way. This is a part of our history. You know, the Belt Trade Agreement was a one-sided agreement. You compelled us to amend our Constitution in order to give to the American businessmen the right to exploit our natural resources and to engage in business, to participate in the running of public utilities, while you imposed quotas on our products coming to the United States. Now, that's a one-sided game.
Mr. President, in a recent published interview, you suggested that the kind of democracy that the Philippines ought to have, in your view, is something that falls really between I don't think you mentioned the Soviet Union specifically, but the suggestion was that you didn't really feel that you wanted to belong to either of the superpower camps.
No. What we said was the Constitutional Convention, that's what convoked in 1970, approved a pure parliamentary form of government. And we all objected to a pure parliamentary form of government. I was for a presidential form. Now we have compromised and we have a modified presidential form. The president is elected by the people because that's what the people wanted, but the members of the National Assembly are also elected by the people. However, the National Assembly elects a prime minister who actually is the leader in the National Assembly.
But there is hardly anyone who knows the Philippines who believes that the prime minister has a great deal of power. Most people believe that the power resides almost entirely in your hands.
That's ridiculous. There is nothing that happens that is not recommended by the Prime Minister and the Executive Committee which he heads. The President either approves or disapproves their recommendation. That's quite true in some very important cases. But actually what happens is the President, whenever there's a big controversy on policy, calls a caucus of the party in accordance with the parliamentary system. Now remember, we have a semi-parliamentary system. And this is also the reason why I have such a long period of tenure in office. You are used to the presidential system, where your president is limited to 2 terms under a specific provision of the Constitution. In a parliamentary system, there's no limit to the length of the tenure of the president.
Mr. President, we're going to have to take another break. When we come back, I'd like to raise with you the question of succession.
Okay.
We'll continue our conversation in a moment. Joining us again live now from New York, President Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines. Mr. President, you created an executive committee of, I believe, what, some 15 members, among them your wife, to succeed you, or at least to act in your behalf if you became either ill or if you unexpectedly died. Why was that necessary?
If I become disqualified, if I die, if I resign, or for any reason I cannot perform my job, the Constitution is the one that provides for this executive committee of 15 men. Now, the appointment of my wife, did you say?
Yes.
Well, it was dictated by the party. I refused to appoint her in the 1978 when we organized the National Assembly. Instead, I insisted on the Prime Minister, Cesar Virata. Prime Minister Cesar Virata nominated her, but the party agreed with me that we should have Prime Minister Cesar Virata, so we have Prime Minister Cesar Virata. But later on, when she became the Minister of Human Settlements, the party approved a unanimous resolution which I could not refuse, and accordingly I appointed her as a member of the Executive Committee, but only as a member, to help the Prime Minister.
Would they have done that, do you think, Mr. President, if they had really felt that you bitterly opposed it?
Oh, yes, oh, yes. How many times have they opposed decisions that I had openly stated was the better thing to do? For instance, as I have told you, in Caucus, I insisted on lifting martial law in 1977 and 1978. But I was voted down by the party because of the massacre of General Bautista in the South. I wanted to lift martial law as quickly as possible.
And you didn't want your wife on the Executive Committee?
I didn't want my wife in the Executive Committee. I don't want her in the Executive Committee. I would prefer that she does not have anything to do with the Executive Committee or with succession.
Well, let's talk about succession for a moment. Do you want to state categorically then that you don't want your wife to succeed?
I would prefer that she does not succeed me, but I won't be there, incidentally. I won't have much to do about it. But let's be frank about this whole thing. She and I would prefer that she stays in the sidelines and supports whoever may replace me.
Well,
you may need the support of the First Lady.
If you prefer it and she prefers it, who's pushing for it so hard?
No, there's no one precisely. This is why we are surprised. We get this from the opposition, from you here in the United States, but we don't get it from our own party.
Let me ask you briefly about the bases at Clark and Subic. What has been decided, if anything, during your visit here to the United States?
Well,
and what are your expectations and intentions?
No, actually what we wanted was that we determine exactly what is our role. Look, undoubtedly, you're going to get committed in the Indian Ocean and the Middle East. And some of your units are going to be pulled out again, and you will probably have to weaken your military presence in the Pacific. Now, what I wanted to know is what is expected of us. What are the defense plans? And so we worked out a regular meeting between the two defense secretaries, the U.S. and the Philippine defense secretaries. They meet next November, and periodically after that. We have also a mutual defense board under the Mutual Defense Act.
I can't let the evening go by, I'm afraid, without at least raising one question about human rights. Let me raise let me raise it in terms of the questions raised by Amnesty International. They say they have given you specific indications of where human rights violations of concern, and that they have received no response from you or from your Ministry of Defense.
They never even bothered to see us. Look, they say they interviewed 71 people in 17 days. Now, I don't know if you are a lawyer. If you can interview 71 people in 17 days and take down their statements, sworn statements, by God, they must be great lawyers. At the same time, they speak of Marcos assuming all government powers. You and I know that I haven't assumed all government powers. They speak of armed forces of the Philippines, 200,000 strong. I'm reading from the report of Amnesty International. That's an exaggeration. I won't tell you the exact strength of our armed forces, but it's very much less than that. They talk about our arresting 50,000 people. For Pete's sake, can't they get the figures right? And about 60,000 people dying in the fight with the communists and with the secessionist movement. The casualties on the part of the armed forces would be about closer to 1,500.
Mr. President, the reason I posed the question the way I did was that I'm ill-equipped to argue or debate statistics with you, nor should I. If you say that is so, then I have to believe you. But
yes,
why don't you respond to them directly? Why not?
Because they have never bothered to come and see me. The truth of the matter is they come into the country surreptitiously. I don't know who gives them the list of people whom they should see. But I understand last night the Amnesty International man was caught misleading somebody in a debate, saying that he had gone to see the Minister of Justice when he was talking to the son of the Minister of Justice. And of course, immediately it was found out that he was lying. They never tried to meet the Minister of Justice.
You're saying then that if they really made a conscious effort to see you, you'd be happy to see them?
We would be happy to explain to them all these things that are happening. And we will show to them that they are wrong. I've got here the statements of some of the people whom they consider as victims. All these statements show that these victims that they are talking about are not really victims of torture. Many of these statements that are here are planted either by the opposition or by people who are mischievously inclined. I have here, for instance, the case of Father Abedisio. He was reported as missing. What happened? It turned out that he had run off with somebody who claims to be a nun. But we were blamed for it. And there was this case of people who were killed, supposedly, and they were lost. And we couldn't locate them. Our people couldn't locate them. Amnesty International could not locate them. Then we captured the top leader of the Communist Party. And what do we find? We find in his papers the list of casualties of his men. Among the list of casualties were these people that we were looking for.
Mr. President, let me just interrupt for 1 second to tell our stations we're going to go on a little bit longer because we want to give you a complete opportunity to respond to this. Let me just read to you from one of the statements here. I know you've seen this already. President Marcos has recently stated that Amnesty International never confronts government officials with its concerns. In fact, the mission sought a meeting with the Minister of National Defense while in the Philippines. When that was not possible, it wrote raising a number of specific questions and concerns growing out of the mission's findings. No reply was received. Why no reply? Why no meeting?
Let me get this straight. They met with the Minister of Defense in 1975 and 76. And it was agreed that all the meetings would be tape recorded and everything would be documented. But instead, they surreptitiously went into the detention camps where we had permitted them to go. And they had the list of people whom to see. Who gave them the list? The opposition. And they had prepared statements by the prisoners. Who prepared those statements for them? We cannot understand this. And the Minister of Defense, I'm sure, would be willing to meet with them if they play fair and square. But they're not playing fair and square.
Well, let me ask you at this point, why don't you set up the ground rules? What do you think would be fair and square? Where could such a meeting take place? Under what conditions and with whom?
Look, we have been trying to do this for a long, long time. Let Amnesty International come to the country openly and not come into the country secretly. Not come to the country and meet with our opposition. Not come to the country and get a listing from the opposition. And not come to the country with prepared statements. And not come to the country with all kinds of prepared data and statistics without showing them to us. We are entitled to be confronted with all of these supposed charges against us. I've never been confronted with it.
I think
this is the only time that I'm confronted with this. I come to the United States, and what do I get? I get a confrontation with a supposed report from Amnesty International. I've never seen this in my life. Is that fair? And yet I am confronted with it here in the United States. Is that fair? Why didn't they confront me with it when I was in the Philippines and ready to meet them on this matter?
Well, their argument is that, that they tried to confront you with it, that they wanted to talk to you about it, and that they were unable to arrange a meeting either with you or with the Minister of Defense.
Well, no, they never tried to meet with me. They might have tried to meet with the Minister of Defense. But the Minister of Defense is probably trying to establish what he calls a meeting which will be witnessed and recorded properly. Because one thing about meeting with these, some of these people is that they distort the statements given during this meeting. What the Minister of Defense would like to see is that the whole hearing be recorded. He told me so yesterday anyway.
Let me ask you a broader question, if I may, Mr. President.
By all means.
And that is, do you think that Americans are perhaps overly obsessed with this subject of human rights? It was a subject that was raised...
We are all obsessed with human rights, but I'm willing to compare your police brutality cases with the cases of alleged abuse or torture in the Philippines. I am certain that there are more cases of or charges of police brutality here in the United States than in the Philippines. And remember, we have been fighting a rebellion, and you have not. Remember, we have about 100,000 men in the field fighting a war for how many years? 1972 to 1980. You haven't. Well, you cannot expect these soldiers to be all saints. There probably are some scoundrels among them. We've kicked out a lot of them and punished some of them. Some of them are still in jail. And this is where, again, Amnesty International is completely wrong. It says that we've never punished any of these people whom we found guilty. That's not true. That's incorrect. And we are ready to show it to them. That's why I say, why don't they come to the country openly and give everybody a fair hearing instead of secretly going into the country and then coming back to the United States and hitting some people like me with a report which is exaggerated and distorted, like this report. I've never seen this report before.
Do you think, what I'm trying to get at is, do you think that too much has been made of it in this country, and do you think perhaps your own reputation has been unfairly tarnished by it?
Yes, I think that there has been a distortion of, first of all, the figures. For instance, the casualty figures in the fighting of 60,000. And you and I know that that is incorrect. And the arrests of 6,000. We never arrested that number of people. My goodness. If we did, we would be doing nothing but feeding 6,000 people. We cannot even attend to our own soldiers properly when they are in combat.
Is this an issue that was raised at all by members of the Reagan administration? I know it was.
Well, not the cabinet members, but the members of the Senate, yes. Members of the House, yes. Other members, yes. We have talked about this repeatedly.
But not the Reagan administration.
No, I have maintained that our position on human rights is as good as any other country, including that of the United States. We are ready to compare your cases of police brutality with alleged cases of torture and harassment in the Philippines.
Mr. President,
by our armed forces and police.
You haven't been here in a long time, 16 years.
16 years. Actually, I was here during the Eisenhower memorial services for 24 hours.
But you
not on a state visit.
But you haven't been here for an extended period over
yes,
the past 16 years.
a long while.
What changes? What strikes you?
It's not true also that I was not invited during the other administrations. I was.
But
I was too busy attending to those rebellions. I was in the middle of fighting a war. Well, you don't fight 37,000 secessionists armed by foreign power trying to grab part of your land by going to the United States. No, you go stay right there among your troops. You don't fight the communists by running off to Uncle Sam. What can you do to help us? We believe that we can do better by actually staying in the field, which we did. Many of us stayed in the field for a long time. When we didn't have enough people, we didn't have enough regulars. We had the 53,000 of our troops fighting the communists, and nobody could face the secessionist movement. We had to organize the reserves and the citizenry fighting off the secessionists. That's what happened.
On balance, are you pleased by your trip or somewhat disillusioned by it?
I did not get you.
I said, on balance, are you pleased by your trip or somewhat disillusioned?
No, I am not pleased by the trip. I'm happy that President Reagan understands that now we really have to sit down and determine exactly what mechanisms we should establish in order to get the Mutual Defense Pact working, and at the same time, many of the problems pertaining to trade. Because as you know, you are our biggest market. We are your biggest trading partner in Asia.
Mr. President, thank you very much for joining us again. I wish you a safe trip back home.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
We'll be back in a moment.